everybody.
Hello.
It's nice to be here. Unfortunately, I don't speak Chinese. So I think Vladimir will continue single.
Okay, hello. I don't speak Chinese as well, but I won't see it right now. I'll try to talk about React. I don't know how to pronounce that, and actually for me it's kind of this thing. Still, let's try. As it was already mentioned, my name is Vladimir, but it's not in honor of Vladimir Lenin, and even not in honor of Vladimir Putin. That's just because of my grandpa. And it's the first time I'm here in China, and it looks really, really cool so far, just like this guy. And just a few words about my experience. I worked for more than 7 years at Yandex, and I'm a team leader of the team which developed all the portal common components for the whole portal. And I'm also a member of BEM team, and I believe that Yandex is famous not just because we invented BEM, but it is one of the largest company in the largest IT company in the Europe, with more than 7,000 employees, and more than 400 of them are web developers, and we have more than 100 web services, really huge services. So you may think about Yandex as of Google and Amazon and Uber and Spotify, etc. of Russia. And it's not something really strange for you, I believe, because you also have kind of Google of China. And when you work at such a large company, you face a lot of different challenges. So we have a lot of services, and new services appear almost every day. And as a result, we have a really huge code base, and we let a lot of different experiments, A/B testing, etc., etc. And of course, we have large development teams, and new people join us every day. So we always search for some ways to improve our maybe speed to be more productive. And first of all, we decided just to try to work more, and maybe it can help. But eventually we end up with BEM, which was a really game changer for us, and it even has its own identity, its own logo. But I believe most of you at least have heard something about BEM. Yeah, is it true? Some. But the biggest part of BEM is not so famous, unfortunately. And we will talk about some pickups of that internal BEM things in this talk. So the first thing is that BEM is not just for CSS. And still, let's try to walk it from the very beginning. First of all, any interface may be divided into blocks. And I'm sure that it is very familiar to you, because any interface may be divided into React components as well. So it is similar here. And blocks may contain elements. And this is quite similar to the concept of Shadow DOM for web components. So this is just some internal life of each block of each component, which shouldn't be reachable from outside. And then both blocks and elements may have their modifiers. For example, we have a sword, and that's a kind of block. And we can split it into a few elements, and that's quite easy. Then each block, or even each element, may be modified somehow. And not just in terms of static modifiers, but we have the same ears, noses, tails of kittens, but still they have some differences. And these differences are static. The red cat is always red, but we can change modifiers in runtime. For example, we can grab that red kitten and apply modifier wet to it, like this. And it can be also set like this. Then some modifiers may change in the result of some user actions. For example, like this. Okay, so blocks, elements, and modifiers should be somehow mapped into class names. And there are different ways to do it, and the classic naming scheme looks like this. We use underscores to separate elements name from block names. We use one underscore to separate modifiers. Also, there is yet another popular scheme with double dashes to separate modifiers, but the main idea here is that actually naming scheme doesn't matter, while it is still consistent upon your project. And PEM was invented to fix that absence of modularity in CSS when you try to change something and everything is ruined. PEM adds scopes, provides some rules and structure, tries to remove nesting as much as possible, and as a result, it gives you a possibility to reuse some parts of markups, and that's where you end up with reusable components actually. And also, it gives your markup and your styling self-descriptive. So instead of just divs and spans, you now can easily grasp what it's all about. And that was BEM, which we all know. And then let's go to some hidden parts. Okay, so real BEM is the whole methodology, best practices, conventions and rules, which are kind of standard across all the developers who follow that methodology. And as a result, you now can stop thinking while developing, which is really great. So instead of stopping each time you try to create something new and thinking how to now you should do it, you just know how to do it because you have that conventions and rules. And it also provides you with possibility to instrument your code because you have conventions. You know which files have which semantics and so on. And all these ideas are consistent for all the technologies, both in code and on file structure. And we try to keep it declarative as much as possible. So what does it mean to be consistent across all the technologies? It means that it doesn't matter if you implement your component in CSS or maybe JavaScript, HTML, you're writing tests, documentation, anything else. All the technologies will follow just the same rules, just the same conventions everywhere. And on file system, you may have it like this. So also declarativeness may be applied to file structure. And when you have your component with some optional parts, for example, when you need to keep your elements optional, you may move them to separate files. Or modifiers, the same idea. You may move them to separate files to keep your production code as efficient as possible, not to import more than you really need. And it also provides the possibility to extend, to somehow modify the code you actually don't own. It means that if you have some library from NPM, which is developed by another team, you still have the way to change the behavior or look and feel of the components from that library. So here is the structure of modifiers. And yet another concept is levels for components. And again, we can follow the same example with external library. So here we have library with button component, and there is some implementation of the button. And also we have blocks of our project, and we need to modify the way button works. So we don't need to change anything in code of the library to make the button behave or look different. And this idea of levels help us to split a project into different platforms. So for example, we may have some common code for desktop, for phones and tablets. And we can keep that code all together. And then we can add two more layers, one for desktop and one for all the touch devices. So we can put the code for maybe some touch events there. Then we can use our build tools to build the desktop bundle, which is just a sum of common level and desktop level. We can go further and split that touch implementations into some specific things for phones and for tablets, and then build two more bundles. The same goes for splitting your code base into library code and the project itself. Again, absolutely the same idea with levels. And then we can also use it to distribute some common blocks across different projects of your own. So again, instead of just copying and pasting them from project to project, you can have that common implementation as basic level and then apply something for each specific project and build them the way you need. The same goes for theming. So you have your website implemented in different flavors, and you don't need to copy-paste any common code between that different theming. You just move it into a separate level, and it is very easy to add more theming each day, or vice versa. You can very easily remove the theme that you don't need anymore. And it also gives us possibility to lead some A/B testing very, very easily. So, for example, we can have our project implementation, and then marketing team may decide to check a few different changes. So we just add a layer which changes our project in the way they want, and started to push that new bundle to just a tiny piece of our audience. And then we analyze the results and see that first experiment was failed and the second one. So all we have to do now is just to keep a bundle with code of experiment level B and to remove everything about A, and that's it. We don't have any ifs inside our core component implementation. Nothing to do with looking here and there to find all the remnants of failed experiments. Just separate levels, separate folders each time. You may also think about these levels of redefinition as of layers in Photoshop, where each layer can override or provide something additional for the layers for basic levels. And we also have a bunch of different tools in them to help us to develop every day like this. So, as the result, we can split any interface into a bunch of different but still reusable components which can be modified by themselves or with the help of that layers of redefinition. And then we can combine them to get really huge and complex services like this. And I understand that you may say that, well, nothing's so new, because almost all these concepts we have here in React. And of course we started to implement all these things many years ago, before React was invented. But still, when we find out how great React is, we decided to migrate our services to it. And we started a few years ago and find out that we lack some of the concepts of them here in React. So we decided to fix that, and we were absolutely sure that all the BEM ideas are applicable to React, because blocks are just components, absolutely the same idea.
主要是
And
录嘉宾
elements are kind of components of components. As I already said, it's just some internal implementation of something bigger, which shouldn't be accessible from outside. And with BEM, we just already know the rules, how to keep all the code of these elements when we implement them in React.js. We just use the same naming convention. We just use the same file structure. And all the developers who follow BEM methodology already know how to keep all this code, how to build it, how to write documentation for it from the very beginning. And in our web stack, which was invented at Yandex, we had the possibility of declarative markup definition, and in next few slides I will show you what it means. We also lacked that power of modifiers very much. So we also found a way how to provide them to React and these redefinitions as well. So we created an open-sourced library called PEM React Core, which is published to GitHub and is possible to install with npm. All you need to do is install it with the React DOM and you're ready to go. And then you just import class called block from the library. And then you should you should create your own component extending that base block. And now you have these additional methods to help you to redefine all the aspects of markup, for example. So here on this example you can see that tag method. It gives you possibility to change just the tag of your component without interfering with all the other rendering things of that component. You can also change attributes just the same way. And of course you can still use all the lifecycle methods, all the methods you created by yourself, just the same way as in React, because that block class which we provide from PEM React Core is just it just extends basic React component. And then you can render it just the way you want to. Just the same idea is here for elements. You extend class element and all the same possibilities are there. So, what do we have? We have tag to redefine tag, of course. Attributes, modifiers. We can call special method to provide inline markup for styling. And we also have content. That's everything you need to render inside the wrapper of your component. Each of these methods can get props as its attribute argument, and so you may decide on which tag or which attributes you should render, just looking into the props. And of course you still may redefine render method if you need to change the full component or you want to render a few different components from it. Okay, the next thing is declarative modifiers. And here is a real example from Microsoft library called Office UI Fabric React. And that's the way how to have kind of a lot of modifiers for a button component. You just implement all these different types, then you export them from one file, and then you need something like this to render the type you really need. But actually, you still lack the possibility to have, for example, primary button with icon. And that's kind of strange, because why? It is really convenient to have different types combined. And that's exactly what modifiers can help you with. So modifiers provide the way of that multiple inheritance. So now you can say, okay, I need a button and it should be compound, primary, and has that icon check. And that's it. And here is the syntax to declare that modifier. So we have some basic button implementation, and then we extend it with that modifier declaration and say that we need a tag instead of button tag, for example. We need to provide some additional modifiers, and we need to render href attribute, and that's it. So you just keep it into a separate file, and as soon as it has that type as link, all these redefinitions will be applied in runtime. You don't need to write any if statements in your basic component to have all these modifications. So you may create that basic implementation, publish it into some library, and then any other developer who don't have access to your code may just provide any other modifiers, and they will all be combined together with the help of that hook called with mods, which is provided from React core. And in this example, we just create a button with a link modifier, but with mods can have an infinite number of different modifiers, and you can combine absolutely anything you want into the same component. Okay, the next thing that the library provides is the way to render some simple HTML markup when you don't need to create special classes. So that's just the way to render div with my blog class name, and to nest div, to nest span, as there is tag prop with the class name my blog inner as an element. There are a few more similar helpers there, so you can grab the documentation and check them for your own. And the last thing I want to mention is the way to render class names. It is very simple helper, but if you try to search npm for BAM space React, you will find, I think, a few hundreds of different modules just to render BAM class names for React components. And we decided why not to invent one more, just in our own library. And actually it's, I believe, better than all the others in at least 2 points. The first one is that it is very cheap in terms of bytes you need to load. And the second one is its flexibility. So you operate with just blocks, elements, and modifiers, and the result markup may be very flexible, changed with the help of different options. So give it a try. And if you like it, you may find it on GitHub as BAM React Core, or you may just skip that step and clone the boilerplate where it is already installed, and there's also TypeScript installed, which we strongly believe is very convenient to use together. And of course, BAM React Core provides all the needed typings for that. And if you face any troubles using this library, feel free to ask the questions on our forum at bam.info. And just to summarize, BAM is not just for CSS, it's much bigger, and BAM loves React very much. So keep calm and BAM. Thank you.
大家有2个问题，大家可以用中文问，我们可以帮大家翻译成英文。大家有问题吗？
可以举手，有问题的可以举手。
Any questions?
我看问题就是GPT 方法，然后有 mod 方法，然后传入那个 type 参数，结果 return type 参数，直接 return 那个 type 值，这是做什么用的？对，然后就是发现有个方法写的很奇怪，就是有 mod 方法，然后传入一个 type 值，with mod function。Yes. And is a mode function inject type and just return type value.
Yeah, the reason of that function is to check if these modifiers should be or should not applied. So, for example, if you try to render button without prop type with the value link, it won't change its tag or attributes. So that's exactly the way to give you possibility to have a lot of different modifiers all together on your file system, and then combined with that with mods helper. And as soon as your props change, you will render different type of markup, or you will change the way your method works, and so on.
Thank you.
大家还有别的问题吗？都可以用中文问。我们今天到场的很多专业讲师。那我们后面会有视频，然后大家可以关注一下那个视频的中文翻译。So he would like you to repeat again the answers because he couldn't follow. Could you do that again?
What exactly?
The last question. Could you repeat the answer again? The question you answered just now.
Okay, the question was why there is that static method called mod, which just returns Boolean value, and how we use it from within with mods. So the reason to have that method is just to check if we should or should not apply these tag mods, attributes, and other redefinitions to the basic button component.
他刚才说的就是那个 function， 那个 type 的 function 会return， 只是用来做鉴定的，他们会需要check 一下，就检查一下需不需要 run 那个 type 第一个 function 是通过第二个 function 来鉴定的。如果第二个 function 有 return 一个确定的值的话，他们就会 run 第一个 function。
I believe there is a question on the first row.
我来帮忙解释一下吧。他的意思就是说，如果你要用这个 button link 的时候，然后要配其他的 modifier， 它必须满足你先有那个 link 的 attribute 上面，然后是可以配其他的 modifier。我理解是这个意思。我的问题，我自己也可以用英文说。我的问题是说，当有很多 modifier 的时候，那个 modifier 之间会不会有一些依赖和优先级的问题？ So my question is, would you be in practice? Would you be a case that will be will have a lot of modifiers that might have dependencies or precedency problems? How did you solve those problems?
Well, you still can import all the needed dependencies from within each separate file of each different modifiers. If you need to, say, use different implementations of rendering function, so for example, you need to render input field which should provide you possibility to, when it's focused, to render calendar, and that calendar should be different according to different value of a modifier. You just can end up with some special convention. Let's say you may provide dependency method and return the components you need to call in your render function. So each modifier may just override that dependency method with the imports it needs. And as a result, you will render different component for calendar appearing when you click into that input.
Does it mean you need to expose the dependencies?
Yeah, sure.
How about precedency? So if there will be cases, for example, for this you have button with different types of links, and the developer might mistype or put multiple types inside. So how does BAM deal with that? So which one would be rendered at the end?
You mean what if different modifiers will try to override the same property?
Is it the type is only available for?
No, we have that order in which we provide arguments to with mods function at the very bottom.
Okay.
So the last one will override all the previous calls, but here in, for example, add TTRS function, we can call super to get the previous value, and we can just extend it. So everything will be in our disposal to decide what value we should return at the end.
So it depends on the execution of the code. So the last one will override it.
Yeah. But the previous one is accessible via super call.
我的问题是，我刚已经说过，我问题是怎么解决依赖和优先级的问题，然后依赖的问题是解决方法就是你要把这个依赖暴露出来，就是说你在其他地方调用这个 modifier 的时候，如果 modifier 之间是互相有依赖，你需要把这个依赖暴露出来。然后 precedency 的解决方式就是说，它会按照执行的顺序，如果你有不同的，比如说这个 button link 会有不同的写法的话，最后一个执行呢会 override 前面一个执行，但前面一个执行可以得到之前执行的这个用 super 的方法可以知道之前执行的这个上下文。谢谢 ，Thank you。
Thank you for your question. 最后一个问题。
你好，其实我有2个问题。第一个问题是，据我所知 ，React 官方并不建议继承 React Component， 然后再不断的继承下去。他们的建议是，组合优于继承，所以建议大家直接继承 React Component， 然后写你的组件，然后组合你的组件。Vent React Core 是用了自己不是直接继承 React Component， 这种原因是为什么？这是我的第一个问题。第二个问题是，React JSX。
我们先提一下，先翻译一下第一个问题。
可以。好。
As we know, the React core team didn't recommend the usage of the other component methods, the modernization methods. It's recommended to use the components itself. So why would your team still use ban on React instead of using their own component method?
The answer is just on this slide, because we need a way to combine a lot of different modifications at the same time in different ways. And actually that's the only way how we can achieve that without a need to add some changes into our basic implementation of the code. So that's the only way to kind of interact with initial code without need to think for the future at the very beginning. So we can publish the component without any possibility to modify it, and then every other developer can just come and provide needed modifiers by himself.
他说是因为这是他们觉得这是唯一一个管理 modifier 的方法，然后用这种方式的话，在开发者使用的过程里面，他不需要去关注它是否被是否那个有变化是。
OK， 那我可以问第二个问题吗？从 slide 里面展示的代码来看，它看起来其实跟 React 不是很像。然后 React 的 JSX 之所以比 Template 在某种方面有优势，是因为它可以用完全的 JS 能力，而不是几个模板指令。那我不知道 BEM React Core 它是不是还拥有 JSX 提供的那个可以写任意 JS 的能力，还是说只能按照它给的 Tag Mode 等等的这个 API 来实现我们的功能？
So in React, we can take full use. We can make advantage of the JSX coding, but in BEM, if we are using BEM, it's quite limited on the BEM the template itself. Is it possible to use
JSX 可以拥有 JS 的所有能力，但这个看起来好像并没有展示出也保留这个能力。
If we are using BEM, is it possible to still make use of JSX?
Thank you, I got it. Yes, of course you can just use that just the same way as you expected, because you still extend that very basic React component, which is just provided with few additional helpers, and that's it. So you still can render that button component as JS6, and you don't need to change anything in this thing.
所以在就这个例子来说，我们还是可以在 button 组件里写任的方法，然后在里面写任意的 React 合法代码，是吗？
So for example, in this example, we can still use the render inside the block and 后面
写任意的 React 合法代码。
and write any one React code inside the block, right?
I'm not sure that I
So inside the button class here, is it true that we can still make advantage of the random function of React and write any valid React code inside?
Sure, of course. All the methods are still available.
OK， 我了解，谢谢。
Thank you.